Hello, my fellow seekers. Welcome to Into the Work, therapy for empaths, seekers, and the intuitively driven, where you have front row seats to therapy sessions and expert interviews that will help you define the important work that you're here to do. So I guess you actually have something better than front row seats. You practically have a seat on my couch. That's right, you will have unrestricted access to actual sessions with real people, exploring real life issues. You will continue to be inspired by powerful conversations with experts and healers that might just share exactly what it is that you need to hear to get unstuck. I am Michelle Pauverman. I am a recovering people pleaser and former anxiety-driven empath, turned now mostly grounded psychotherapist and intuitive coach. I have been helping people for almost 20 years manage their limiting beliefs and anxiety to finally stop the self-sabotage and step into their gifts. I created this podcast, Into the Work, to give you a place to learn more about yourself and give you actionable strategies to finally move those roadblocks holding you back so you can go for what you want. Above all else, my hope is that this podcast is a catalyst for your awakening. If you're listening, you've already taken a step towards getting off of autopilot, and our next steps together will be taken episode by episode, waking you up to the possibilities, the new ways of thinking and being, so that you can stretch into that next level of your story. The spark has already been lit, and my friend, this is a journey from spark to brilliance. So together, let's light a fire. Hello, and welcome back to the show. Today, I'm talking about healing guilt. So many people have been talking to me about guilt lately. So many people are struggling, particularly with guilt, when it comes to setting boundaries. I get this all the time, but for whatever reason, it's coming up a lot lately, so I wanted to talk about it today on the show. Healing guilt is tricky, but it is possible to heal guilt. It's 100% possible to heal guilt. So the guilt that's sabotaging your goals, the guilt that's sabotaging your boundary setting to focus on yourself and really narrow in on creating the life that you want, we don't realize that guilt is such a big part of the block that keeps you from being able to move forward in areas that you really want to, that require you to hold some boundaries. So today I'm going to talk about some really important stuff to identify that you're probably doing. You might not realize it, because the first step in being able to change any of this is always awareness, observation, showing up in the moment. We can't fix what happened. We can't fix what's going to happen. We can only really work with this in the present moment. I'm going to start off talking about a few misconceptions and fears that likely contribute to the guilt you experience when you try to set a boundary, okay? I want to tackle a few of these today. There, of course, are so many more, but this will give you a flavor of some things that you can pay attention to right now. And by paying attention to them, you can make a difference in how you show up in it. And that is the gold. That is the that is the portal into making change, is the present moment, noticing it. So just here listening to this today can be a powerful start for you to really step into making changes in your day-to-day, which eventually add up to the big goals, the big things you're going for, right? So let's dive a bit deeper. I'm going to lay out a few foundational things. First off, I just want to talk about a few most common things. And these might be things you would consider on your own, but let's just put them out there, okay? The first thing is you have a fear or perhaps a misconception or a perception that you will be rejected or disliked in some way by setting a boundary. They will disapprove of you. They will disapprove of your choice, what you're doing. You will potentially also, you have a fear that you will potentially be abandoned in some way. They will somehow disconnect from you in the relationship. Another reason or another fear that we have is that the relationship will change. And in some way, by creating this boundary or setting this boundary, you will be changing the relationship, and that feels unsafe. That doesn't feel good. The other last one that's the most, I think, the biggest one that everybody seems to struggle with most often is the other person will be disappointed in you. I can't tell you how many people come to me and say, I just don't want to disappoint people. I hate disappointing people. I just know how disappointed they're going to be if I say that or do that. So I want to point out some mistakes you might be making that also support your guilty feelings and thoughts, because these are guilty feelings and thoughts, right? And so there are some mistakes you might be making, and I just want to point them out to you here. Number one, you confuse thoughts as facts. You can many times buy into whatever your brain is selling. So let's narrow this down, right? That is a bad habit a lot of us have. We have a thought, we buy into it. Here are two examples you really might want to pay attention to. First, when you think to yourself and you begin a sentence with, I feel like, okay? This is an example of you confusing thoughts as facts, right? So when you think to yourself and you begin a sentence with, I feel like, for instance, I feel like if I set a boundary, they'll be so disappointed in me. I feel like I'm being so mean and selfish. I feel like they will be so angry with me. I feel like I'm letting them down. I feel like I have to do it because they need me. These statements that follow, I feel like, are not feelings. They're not emotions. They are fear-based beliefs. They're not facts, but they are not feelings. And when we do this, when we say, I feel like, and then we couple that with a story, we tend to trick ourselves into believing that our feelings are signaling something that is true. It's not. Even after you set the boundary and the other person is like, no problem, that works, that's fine, you still feel guilty, right? Not because it was a problem for the other person or that they let you know that it was a problem, but because you still believe that story that was attached to that I feel like. And so that story becomes what's real, not even the truth in front of you, which is the person said it was fine, right? A second example of how we confuse thoughts as facts is that you confuse the words I have to actually mean I have to, right? Like just because you say I have to doesn't actually mean you have to. So whenever you say I have to, consider this. It may be an indicator of a compulsion to please, fix, or rescue versus a desire or a want or fulfilling act that brings balance to everyone involved. Okay? 9 times out of 10, when we challenge the compulsion to I have to, that compulsion, and I don't know if you know what a compulsion is, but a compulsion is an action that we take basically to alleviate the anxiety that we're having in that moment about that thing. They're most commonly known with OCD. You hear that obsessive compulsive behavior. But when we look at compulsion and boundary setting, a lot of times the words I have to really are just a compulsion to extinguish our own anxiety, not even about other people's true feelings or what's truly happening in the moment. It's to basically alleviate your own anxiety. So 9 out of 10 times when we challenge that compulsion to say I have to, so I have to, we find that everyone's still alive, right? So when we challenge it and we don't follow through on the I have to, we actually find out that everybody is still alive and well. And even though you didn't do the thing, everybody's okay. So it's important for you to realize that what you are up against isn't truth. It's a compulsion to support an action that alleviate anxiety and guilt. And so guilt fuels this as well. Now, another mistake, this would be mistake number 2, is that you confuse selfish with self-love. I know we've all heard it. Self-care isn't selfish, right? We've heard these words before, but you're doing it. We're all doing it. We're all likely doing it on some level. So if you're multitasking, I want you to come back to me right now, because this is something that everyone seems to struggle with at some point. I just want to make sure we really have open ears here, because it's really important to understand that selfish individuals truly disregard the needs of others in order to seek personal gain without regard to fairness, equality in a relationship. I really want you to understand what it means to be selfish. And so that means that in order for you to define it as selfish, these are sort of definitions I've pulled from different places, then you have to understand that selfish means disregard for the needs of others completely in order to seek a personal gain without regard at all to fairness or equality in a relationship. They will sometimes manipulate people and show a lack of compassion or empathy towards others. Focus is inward, not outward, right? Now, don't get me wrong. Sometimes when we are burnt out, right? When your ass is burnt out, you are exhausted, you've been overgiving, overextending, you're an empty vessel, and you experience compassion fatigue, we can literally lose the ability to care. It's a psychological safety feature to restore us back to balance and well-being, right? So compassion fatigue is different than selfish. So if you are typically a very empathic person and you've been overgiving, overextending, you can experience a lack of compassion when trying to set boundaries as a symptom of compassion fatigue. And it is a self-preservation feature. And it doesn't, I'm just kind of repeating myself here, but it does not mean that you are selfish. In fact, that you are even concerned that you might be selfish by definition negates the possibility of you being selfish. Selfish people aren't concerned with being selfish, right? They aren't worried about the other people. They're not obsessing. They're not thinking about, oh, it's not nice, it's not mean, it's all the things, right? Or it's mean. They're not thinking outwardly. They're thinking inwardly. Their focus is inward on their own stuff and what they need and what they want. And that is what really only typically drives them. They're not worried about how the other person feels or how the other person is perceiving them or their boundary. It's possible instead that you are coming up against your own shadow parts or limiting beliefs that encourage you to actually use guilt to keep you in line. So when you are confusing selfishness and self-love, you can be coming up against these parts. For instance, you can hold this belief that deep down, you are wired to believe that you need to matter less to be loved more. So that in itself can be a limiting belief, and it can play its way into a shadow part. And not to get too into this, but I just want to say, if it's a shadow part, you feel shame and embarrassment over it. If it's just simply a limiting belief, you could possibly wear it as a badge of honor or feel like you're doing a really good thing and, you want everybody to see how good you're doing putting everybody else first, right? That's just a good way to differentiate. Now, bottom line, self-care includes compassion and consideration for others. Selfishness does not include compassion or consideration of others. So let me be clear. Compassion does not mean that you self-abandon. So you can do self-care and be compassionate. In fact, a good way to talk to yourself about it next time you're trying to perhaps do self-care and set boundaries around your self-care, you can say to yourself, I have compassion for both of us right now. However, it's better for me to feel compassion versus resentment, right? So compassion does not lead to illness. Compassion does not lead to, sleepless nights, endless stress hormones flooding the body. You get me, right? So compassion plus boundary setting equals balance between your self-care and caring for others. So I have compassion for both of us, but I am in charge of me. allows you to recognize that, you are responsible for yourself and your well-being. I mean, say that to yourself. I am responsible for myself and my well-being. I am the one that needs to choose wisely at this time. I am the one to set a boundary, even though I feel compassion for both of us. Notice the lack of guilt there. Can you see that? When you hold and even perhaps, take pride in your job of being the person who is responsible for your well-being, you can embrace doing the right thing without self-abandonment. It is the right thing. Self-care is the right thing sometimes, many times, probably most, right? But it's integrity. You are taking responsibility for your well-being. That's your job. People stopped making it their job when you became, 19 or 20, right? Or maybe younger, depending on your life experience and your family. But it is no longer anybody else's job. It is yours, and it is sacred, and it is important. You are in charge of your health. You are in charge of how this life goes for you. So that's a big job. And so to hold it with honor and pride and to say, with an integrity, and to say that I can have compassion for both of us. And in this moment, I have to choose me because compassion is better than resentment for your well-being. And sometimes you'll choose the other person and that will feel okay. That'll feel in alignment with what's right for you. Because I'm not saying that we need to stop giving. I'm just saying we need to stop self-abandoning, right? And we'll get to know the difference between it. Okay, the next mistake that we're making is number 3 here. And this one is, or really truly can be a big one, especially those of us that have to be a little bit rigid in our boundaries in order to set them. A lot of times you'll see this when we are quite resentful and angry or frustrated or taken advantage of, feel like we're being taken advantage of. In those instances, we get kind of rigid because we need to use anger and all these negative feelings in order to give us the energy or power to set the boundary. But I want to say this works in general, right? All the boundaries that you're setting. And this is a big one. This one fuels guilt. And that is that you are confusing boundaries for walls and barriers that will lead to your isolation or disconnection from people. Because if you set a boundary, and this means you are putting up a barrier between you and someone else you care about, you're going to feel guilty about disconnecting yourself from them or the relationship in some way, right? So by believing that these boundaries are barriers, you're kind of creating this painful story that in order to take care of yourself, you're going to have to disconnect from the friendship or the relationship or the coworkership, right? So I want to be really clear. I want you to hear this today. And you've probably heard it before, but I want you to breathe it in again today. Boundaries are not about keeping people away. They are about you being honest and truthful about what is healthy and okay for you. They are not about keeping people away. You are the one responsible for your well-being. I'm kind of nailing this point in, I realize, but nobody or anything external from you is responsible for you. So the boundary is about stepping into that responsibility with integrity. It is not about keeping people away, okay? So those are 3 common things I see people doing that are just confuses them and fuels guilt and makes it hard to move forward in the process of setting a boundary. The next thing I want to actually talk to you about real quick is I just also want to mention the concept of owing people. This comes up a lot, you guys. It comes up a lot. So when you have a discomfort with receiving, which so many of us sensitive, empathic types do, we overgive, but we don't overtake, right? So if you have a discomfort with receiving, many of our possible underlying limiting beliefs, for instance, perhaps feeling unworthy is one of them, can lead to us believing that we must owe somebody something in return in order to receive. This also leads to guilt, and it can get kind of sticky in boundary setting too. For example, let's say Sally did this wonderful thing for you, and you probably didn't even ask. right? Because you never ask, right? Now she's coming to you. Maybe that was like a month ago and Sally did this wonderful thing for you. And now she's coming to you and asking you her current request. And you want to say no, like it's burning fire in you. Like, I cannot do that right now. There's 1,000 reasons why you can't do that right now, but you owe her. So you feel trapped and you perceive that the guilt is worse than the abandonment, right? Sound familiar? This is a good example of how the path of least resistance is usually self-abandonment, right? It just feels easier. Like it is so much easier for me to just do the familiar. We have carved out deep neurological pathways here and have done this self-abandonment thing over and over and over, and it seemingly becomes the safest route to go. It feels like it's easier because it's familiar. But just because it's familiar doesn't mean it's not harming you. I need you to know that. Just because you're doing something you've done 100 times does not mean it's not harming you. The guilt of owing can really come up in some small ways and big ways. Here's another couple of examples just to kind of sprinkle you with a couple of thoughts on this. For example, let's say you desperately need to process something that happened to you. So you get your friends in undivided attention. You go out to lunch or something. And now you share for a few minutes about what's going on. But the longer you talk, the more uncomfortable you seem to be getting. And suddenly you want to quickly, from an anxious place, you want to shift the attention off of you as quick as possible. And make sure you start focusing on your friend because you are struggling with taking up too much space and you owe equal attention in return, right? It's like, this is getting too much. Now I owe you and I have to get back to you and I can't continue. I can't sit here and comfortably absorb it. And I realize this is going to hit on a lot of different wounds. And there are other reasons at work here too why you might feel this way. But I do want you to recognize how owing somebody can be that tricky and that undercover in that situation. You don't even realize that constant need to be in balance, that you're not out of balance with people, that you owe somebody something if they give you something. Do you ever really notice that? Honestly, do you ever notice that you hate owing people? Some of you don't have a problem with this, and that's wonderful. There just are going to be a lot of you that do, because I hear it all the time. I hear it all the time. I hate owing people. I can't do that because then I can't accept that help. I can't do this thing because I don't like the feeling of owing people. I just want you to know and walk away from this knowing that if that's you, I just want to say that usually is pointing to a boundary issue and how much you struggle with guilt. It is an indicator of guilt, this whole owing thing. And I really want you to hear what may sound controversial. This may even sound rude to you. So I hope I don't lose you, but you don't owe anybody anything ever. I'm going to say it again. You do not owe anybody anything ever. It's just a concept that you have been taught. Perhaps it's something you witnessed. Perhaps it's something you came up with to play safe when you were younger. You learned it though. This can be such a freeing discovery because now you can shift into giving from your heart and not your overthinking, guilty brain. When you embrace the mantra, I don't owe anybody anything ever, you can give freely. You can receive freely without attachments. So I highly recommend that you just really embrace that mantra and try to get rid of the attachment you might have to it, which is a reaction that somehow that makes you a bad person, that of course you owe people. My mama took care of me my whole life. I owe her, right? But no, we don't. We don't owe anybody anything. We make choices. I choose to show up for my mom. I choose to show up for my friend. I choose to show up for my parents, my brothers, my sisters, my coworkers. In relationship, I choose to show up when it is safe and okay for me, not when it depletes me and makes me unwell. So I think we can see how powerful guilt can be in so many ways you might not have been thinking about. But I also want you to hear that you can totally heal guilt. It's going to take a minute, but you can heal it. It's just going to take a little time. It's a process. Guilt is like something you learned growing up. Exploring the way your family handled guilt, what you learned, how you were impacted by it is good. It will be helpful, especially if you grew up in a home with alcoholism or other unpredictable parenting behaviors that were emotional roller coasters or physically or emotionally abusive. Or perhaps it's just the way your parents got you to do anything and everything was guilt, right? That's a part of every culture, honestly. If you really look through most cultures, you'll see that as a parenting tool. So I just want you to know that you can change guilt. You can learn to step into your power. There are so many reasons for you to do this. As we talked about earlier, guilt may be keeping you from allowing others to be there for you in a crucial part of reciprocity in relationships, right? It robs others the opportunity to give back if you can't allow other people to give and for you to receive. And if it just makes you guilty and you don't do that, then you're hurting your relationships. It also can keep you from trusting others to figure things out, fall down, and learn lessons. Our overgiving through guilt is also mixed with our inability to trust in other people's ability to persevere, right? You get that? And habitual rescuing might rob someone of learning crucial lessons that strengthen their character and their resilience factors in the long run. Guilt is not the tool that we need to be good at something as a parent, a friend, again, a coworker, whatever your role is, whatever that guilt is coming up. Now, guilt in itself is supposed to be useful as an emotion. It is supposed to keep us in track with our moral values, right? So if we stray too far, we feel guilty. But there are other ways of keeping track of that moral value without sinking into guilt, allowing guilt to keep you from taking good care of yourself, allowing guilt to get in the way of your relationships, allowing guilt to get in the way of you allowing other people to be empowered to do the right thing for themselves. Deciding to do this is just step one. Here's the deal. You have to change how you think about it, okay? So in order for you to do that, you have to be present. You can't be on autopilot, running around like a pinball in a machine, bouncing off everything. You can't. You have to be present because, as I said earlier, and I say all the time, the only time you can change anything is in the present moment. When you're thinking about it, deciding to do this, saying to yourself today, I am going to stop letting guilt rule how I make decisions, how I take care of myself, how I show up with my loved ones. I am going to do that. I'm going to stop it from getting in the way. I'm going to change it. I'm going to show up healthier and more loving and compassionate instead of guilt. Just simply deciding this is step one. And then another thing that could be helpful that I just going to end on today is creating mantras that you can use to set intention every day to respect your need for boundaries. It's awesome. I know everybody's talking about, hey, create these mantras, but there's a reason for that. It actually is helpful for the brain to hear this and perceive it as truth. So when you say these mantras, I want you to think about those neurological pathways we talked about carving out over and over and over again when it comes to, all behaviors that are done over and over and over again, right? So whether that be guilt or overgiving and overextending and all that. But I want you to consider mantras like going over to the other side of the fence and carving out pathways there. That the more you do it, that crevice, those neurological connections get deeper and deeper and deeper. And the more your brain hears these mantras, the more electrical wiring starts going, fizzling and saying, ooh, right? Like, this is familiar. This is true. And when you say it like you mean it, it also resonates as true. And again, it's going to be the path of most resistance to start off with the mantras in the beginning because you're used to doing the easiest thing, which is to just self-abandon, right? So by starting off by saying these mantras and doing it in a way that's saying, I'm just being intentional about this. I'm going to put a mantra on a sticky note in my mirror in the morning, and I'm just going to say it. Even though I see it every day, I know exactly what it says. I'm going to say it out loud, right? Because that is telling my brain, this is what we choose. This is what we believe in, this right here. So based on what we talked about today, I'm going to just set out a handful of mantras that you can see what resonates with you. Some of them are super simple and maybe like, some of them may resonate more. So you could just repeat any of these. If any of these sound good to you, feel free to pause and write it down. So here we go. The first one is setting boundaries is kind and loving. I can be compassionate for you while setting boundaries for me. I am responsible for my own well-being. Other people are responsible for their own well-being. Guilt is an old belief or story not based on truth. I'm ready for new stories that support me. I don't do resentment. I do compassion. I don't do guilt. I do honesty. That's a personal favorite. I'm going to say it again. I don't do resentment. I do compassion. I don't do guilt. I do honesty. I am not responsible for anyone else's feelings. I am wholeheartedly responsible for mine. This is a job I take pride in. It's safe for me to be kind and honest and trust in other people's resiliency. That's my second favorite. I am setting boundaries out of love for myself. I am not building walls. I can stay connected without abandoning my own needs. And the last one, I don't owe anybody anything. I can give freely from my heart when it feels right. Repeating these mantras over time can really help you imprint and start really attaching to these ideas. It will help you stand more in your power. I'm sure just listening to this, you can already see that if I felt these things, if I believed these things, how would your life be different? How might you be showing up differently? What kind of things can you make happen in your life if you didn't have guilt? If you felt really confident about any of these mantras, if you felt like they're all true, releasing guilt and standing in your own power becomes the path of least resistance, and moving towards the powerlessness of guilt becomes less and less attractive to your brain. Thank you so much for listening in today. I hope this was helpful and that you can leave this conversation feeling like you are ready to really take a look at guilt in your life. Okay, be well. Thank you. Thank you for listening to Into the Work Therapy for Empaths and Seekers. Don't forget to grab your free gift, your Shadow Work Transformation Bundle at michellepoverman.com. I've included everything you need to get started to break through the patterns of self-sabotage and finally start to heal the parts of yourself that are getting in the way of truly reaching your potential. From a powerful meditation designed to help you meet and embrace your shadow self, to the guide that's full of curated prompts and important questions to support you on this journey. This really can be the work for you to unmask the root cause of all the issues you've been experiencing, honestly, and start to feel free to believe in yourself and go for what you want. The link for this free bundle is in the show notes. And if you like this episode, I would be so grateful if you could take a moment and rate, click and follow, and leave a review. Of course, you can always follow me on socials at Michelle Poverman. And keep in mind, as you embark on your journey from spark to brilliance, remember, the universe is always conspiring in favor of your awakening. Everything that's happening is in support of you lighting your own fire within. So until we meet again, may your path be well lit and your heart be guided. Shine bright, seekers, until next time.